Hey students, I hope you guys are all doing well today. We're going to be moving into the next PowerPoint lecture for this week in session 2, and we'll be looking at the Vietnam War part 1. We're going to break the Vietnam War into two lectures. The first one is going to be the background of Vietnam all the way up until the landing of the U.S. ground troops in Da Nang, and that's basically the starting point of the ground war of the U.S. In Vietnam. That'll be the first PowerPoint lecture. And then next lecture, session 3 for this week, which is the Vietnam War Part 2, we will pick up at the beginning of the ground war all the way to the fall of Saigon, when the North Vietnamese basically win the war by taking the entire country of South Vietnam. And I'll explain all of that out because basically the United States kind of just started, they just left. We started taking our troop levels down and down and down until about 1972 there was only like 25,000 soldiers even left in the entire country. And then by 1975 there was like nobody left except the South Vietnamese army, and then they couldn't withstand the North Vietnamese, and North Vietnam conquered the South. So it's kind of difficult to say who won or who lost the Vietnam War. If you look at the numbers of dead, the North Vietnamese lost a lot more dead soldiers than the United States. But in the end, the North Vietnamese conquered the South. So, kind of who kind of won? The United States basically just left the country. So as I did before, especially talking more about this more modern history, I went to my bookshelf. There's a book that I want to share with you. It's called Vietnam: A History by Stanley Carnell. This is it's kind of a thick read, but it's the kind of like the standard of the Vietnam War, and it goes from the very beginning of the Vietnam War all the way till the fall of Saigon, and it really covers a lot of detailed information. So if you're ever interested in the Vietnam War, wanting to read about it, this one here is a good book to read. So now we're going to move into the PowerPoint for this lecture. Okay, class, we're going to be now talking about the Vietnam War, Part 1. As you see on the title screen there, there's some soldiers there on the bottom being dropped off there at the landing zone as they headed out into the jungle. And you see the Huey helicopters taking off after dropping them off. So this is a typical scene for the U.S. soldiers in Vietnam. Okay, so before we get into the Vietnam War, we got to talk about some background of what's going on with why this turned into a big issue in the first place. Vietnam was a French colony before World War II. It was called French Indochina. And before World War II, the French basically governed this as a colony. The Japanese had captured Vietnam, which again is called Indochina, during the Second World War, but after the Japanese defeat, the colony was returned to the French. So after World War II, the French still have a lot of control, a lot of influence there. A man named Ho Chi Minh was the leader of a group called the Viet Minh. And this was a communist political group. And this group began insurrections against the French. Well, when you start looking on the world stage of communism, you have communist USSR and China, and there's this little colony now of the French, who is a power in democratic Europe. And the USSR and China look at Vietnam as the next place that maybe that communism can spread. And so the first thing they did was the USSR and China recognized Ho Chi Minh's authority, which he was based in Hanoi, which is the capital of North Vietnam. And they look at him as the leader of a legitimate communist government. And what happens is this backing by the USSR and China gives Ho Chi Minh a lot of power, and so these insurrections against the democratic government and basically the South Vietnamese army. So the backing of USSR and China gives Ho Chi Minh a lot of clout, a lot of power, and so this insurrection turns into the First Indochina War, which is the French versus Ho Chi Minh's communist forces, which are backed by the USSR and China. And it's called the First Indochina War. The Second Indochina War is what we call the Vietnam War. But the First Indochina War was between the French and Ho Chi Minh's forces. There's a picture of Ho Chi Minh, 1890 to 1969. Okay, so the First Indochina War, continuing that, the French and the communist Ho Chi Minh forces are fighting, and there's a decisive battle called the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. And this is a French defeat, and this is a big deal. We're talking France, and they're in this little tiny strip of land colony in Southeast Asia, and the French military is beaten by this kind of ragtag kind of military force of Ho Chi Minh's group. And so the French are defeated, and Vietnam actually gets its independence when the French are defeated. However, the country was split at the 17th parallel, North and South Vietnam. Okay, so the 17th parallel would separate North Vietnam and South Vietnam. The North Vietnamese are communist, and the South Vietnamese are a democracy. And there is an immediate concern now over this because of the domino theory. If you remember the domino theory, where if one country is communist or falls to communism, then the next country next to it, neighboring countries, they would all start falling to communism. Well, that's what everyone's afraid of now, because the North, who was controlled by Ho Chi Minh, now that is communist. And when Vietnam became independent, the negotiations basically split it, where it was communist North and a democracy in the South. So much like Korea, if you remember Korea, that's exactly what took place. That was at the 38th parallel, but this is at the 17th parallel. So there's immediate concerns of the domino theory. So basically, it's looking like going into another war, like the Korean War. So this is Dien Bien Phu, and the reason that this is an interesting battle is the communist Vietnamese forces under Ho Chi Minh, they win because this is the area called Dien Bien Phu, and it's basically this settled area down in the bottom of a valley. So here's the river coming through, is a river valley. And what happened was the Viet Minh forces, they basically surrounded the valley, and they held the high ground. And so basically it turned out to be almost like a siege, and it was just a bad strategic location for the French. The base was in the valley with the Viet Minh, which is the North Vietnamese, on the surrounding mountaintops. And so here's a picture of Dien Bien Phu, and their more reinforcements are being parachuted in, so the French wouldn't be overrun. In the end, they did get overrun, and Vietnam becomes independent from France. Okay, so the Vietnam War, North Vietnam invasion of the South. 1954, plans were in place for the communist North Vietnamese forces to invade the South. In 1959, improvements were made to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and the Ho Chi Minh Trail was a mountainous road and trail network from North Vietnam into South Vietnam. A lot of the trail actually went into neighboring Laos, but it would then come back into Vietnam. And this is how military supplies were moved from the north into the south. So there was improvements made to this trail. 1961 to 63 was the Kennedy years, and during that short time, 40,000 North Vietnamese Army soldiers infiltrated South Vietnam along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So President Eisenhower, he sent 900 U.S. military advisors into South Vietnam. And then John F. Kennedy, by 1963, he sent up to 16,000 U.S. military advisors, and they were to train and support and give special ops help, operations help to the South Vietnamese Army. So here's a picture of Vietnam, North and South. The blue being North Vietnam, the green being South Vietnam. And there's two stars here. One up here, that's called Hanoi, and that is the capital of North Vietnam. And down here is Saigon, and that is the capital of South Vietnam. Right here is the 17th parallel, so that's the split. A DMZ is there, demilitarized zone. And this blue line is the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is in part of Laos and part of Cambodia, but the trail has these offshoots that shoot off into South Vietnam. And so the North Vietnamese would send soldiers and equipment and everything down through this trail into South Vietnam to supply the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, which we'll talk about them in a second, down here in the south. Here's a picture of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Now this picture here is supplies being pushed through a river or a small stream on bicycles. So this transportation of goods, military supplies, all of that was by foot, was by bicycle, by animals, and by trucks. And most of it was under the cover of the jungle canopy. So it was very difficult to even see the Ho Chi Minh Trail from the air. Okay, so we're just continuing now with the PowerPoint of the North Vietnamese invasion. South Vietnam began fighting the North. And so it's the ARVN, which is the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, that is South Vietnamese Army, ARVN, versus the North Vietnamese Army, or the NVA, and the Viet Cong. Now the NVA and the Viet Cong, they fought alongside one another. They helped each other. The NVA was the North Vietnamese Army. That was actual Army soldiers from North Vietnam that invaded South Vietnam. The Viet Cong were actually South Vietnamese citizens who allied themselves with the NVA. Okay, so the NVA was the actual army. The Viet Cong were citizens. It was basically militias that sided with the North. Now, there were full-blown battles between South Vietnam and North Vietnam armies with U.S. advisor support. And as I said before, many times the U.S. advisors were involved in direct combat. November 2nd, 1963, President Diem, who was the president of South Vietnam, he is assassinated. Look at the date, November 2nd, 1963. 20 days later, JFK would be assassinated. So this is a very tumultuous time. And when JFK is assassinated, Lyndon Johnson, LBJ, he is now in charge of the United States. And so what is the United States going to do? Here's a picture of South Vietnamese President Diem after his assassination. So he's dead. So what happens is there's an incident called the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And this is where the United States really starts increasing involvement. The United States Navy was patrolling along the coast of Vietnam, which is coast of North Vietnam. That's where the Gulf of Tonkin is. It's in off the coast of North Vietnam. August 2nd, August 4th, 1964, the USS Maddox and the USS Turner Joy attacked small North Vietnamese Army torpedo boats that were stalking them. And so you have these U.S. warships on patrol, and there's NVA bad guys stalking them, and so the United States fires on them. And so it's called the Gulf of Tonkin Incident. On August 7th, 1964, President Johnson signs the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, and that gave President Johnson power to increase involvement in Vietnam. And now this is where Johnson kind of takes over, and the Vietnam War would become Johnson's war. And basically, because of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, that guided the strategy in Vietnam. It really consumed his presidency. Everything that happened was basically, and his presidency was basically surrounded around Vietnam. There were other things that he did, and other things happened in the 60s, which we'll talk about some of them, but Vietnam really consumed Johnson's presidency. So here's a picture of Vietnam. Here's North Vietnam up here. Here's South Vietnam down here. This red square is the Gulf of Tonkin. So it's up here is where the U.S. was patrolling and fired on those NVA torpedo boats. So after the Gulf of Tonkin incident, one of the first things that takes place because of the resolution was the bombing of North Vietnam. February 7, 1965, the NVA attacked a U.S. Army base at Pleiku. It was a 5-minute raid that killed 9 U.S. and wounded 126, with 1 NVA killed. So if you think about the numbers there, you have 9 U.S. dead with 126 wounded and 1 NVA soldier killed. So that doesn't look good for the United States. So Johnson orders massive bombings of North Vietnam, and this bombing campaign began in the mid-60s, and it would last for many years. Operation Flaming Dart was the first short initial bombing attack in response to the Gulf of Tonkin and the Pleiku incident. The next one is Operation Rolling Thunder. That's from 1965 to 1968. That's a pretty famous campaign of bombing. Over 1 million tons of bombs were dropped in North Vietnam, and this is where Rolling Thunder and Operation Arc Light, which was another bombing campaign. Arc Light overlapped Rolling Thunder, but Arc Light continued all the way into the 1970s. The campaign would include carpet bombing, and carpet bombing is where airplanes just drop bombs along a planned route to basically just start bombing one section, and then it's bomb the next section and the next section, and so you're just like carpeting the ground with bombs. So here's a B-52 dropping bombs. Now these bombs are conventional bombs. They're not nuclear or atomic. They're just conventional bombs. Here's a picture of carpet bombing, and so you just see the plane would come and drop bombs along this path, and then right next to it another plane drops along that path and drops along that path, and then it would just continue and continue. And they didn't have to be right next to each other because these bombs are so big that the bomb would explode there, but the impact would reverberate out. And so really, if let's say you weren't there where the bomb exploded and you weren't killed there, if you were out here, you could be killed out here just because of the concussion of the bomb blowing up, because these are very powerful weapons. And so basically this swath in the middle here, that people could be killed in there just because of the percussion of the explosive. Okay, 1964 was a busy year with North Vietnam escalation. In 1964, the NVA reached over 1 million soldiers in their army. In anticipation of U.S. ground troops landing, the U.S. takeover from the South Vietnamese army, the NVA expanded the Viet Cong. And so the NVA, looking at this, they're saying, you know what, the United States is going to start landing troops, and the United States is going to take over this war. And so we need to really start training and supplying and infiltrating with the Viet Cong. Massive amounts of arms were shipped to the south via the Ho Chi Minh Trail. There was a change in of the war plan from conventional war to guerrilla war tactics. Okay, so now instead of just like the NVA army attacking somewhere, it's going to be more of a guerrilla warfare tactics, a hit and run type tactics. However, there will be times when the NVA units and the United States units have like a prolonged battle. An example of that would be the Tet offensive in the city of Hue. There would be basically North Vietnamese soldiers fighting United States soldiers in street combat, in urban combat. So it wasn't like just guerrilla warfare in the jungle. You actually had NVA forces facing U.S. forces in what you would typically think of a prolonged battle. But the overall war plan changed to where it was a lot more guerrilla warfare tactics, and that's what you think of a lot of times with Vietnam. When the soldiers are out in the jungle, they don't even see the enemy shoots and kills somebody. There's a short, quick battle, and then the enemy disappears. That's really a lot of that happened in Vietnam. The Viet Cong were given the mission to attack via the hit and run, which they became very skilled at. And then in 1964, the Viet Cong won the Battle of Binh Gia. That was of great importance for the Viet Cong, again, who were like this militias. They're now beating the South Vietnamese army. So because of 1964, the United States has to really get involved. And on March 8th, 1965, basically the United States takes over the war with the landing of 3,500 U.S. Marines at Da Nang, South Vietnam. And basically this is the official start point of the U.S. ground war on March 8th, 1965. Even though there were advisors there before that, and some advisors were even involved in direct combat with the NVA or the Viet Cong, March 8th, 1965 is when the U.S. basically starts sending soldiers in to fight the war. And here's a picture of the Marines landing at Da Nang. And there's another picture here on the right of Vietnam, a map. So here's Da Nang. There was a large air base at Da Nang. And so these Marines were actually sent in first to protect the air base, but then the increase of troops is really going to escalate. Okay, so that's it for the Vietnam War Part 1. I'll see you in a second. Okay, class, that's going to be it for today. We'll have our second part of the Vietnam War next lecture, so stay tuned for that. I'll see you later.